welcome. I'm glad you could join me today. It's Wednesday. This is the 5-Minute Bible Hour. Now, this week we're going to be getting into the book of Daniel. We'll be doing books 1 and 2. I'm calling this one, What's the Deal with Daniel's Superpowers? Well, here, I'll lay it all out for you. First, let's meet Daniel and his buddies. They're a bunch of well-educated teenagers. They just also happen to belong to the upper crust. You know, wealthy, privileged, but their lives are violently torn apart by the brutal and bloody conquest of Israel by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Now, the events described in Daniel, they take place after the first Babylonian attacks in Jerusalem in 586 BC. This isn't a story of fiction, people. These things truly happened. Archaeologists and historians have both confirmed this. So now imagine Daniel's terror as pagan Babylonian warriors in heavy combat armor kick the door in of the palace and seize or kill anyone that they want. And they seized Daniel and 3 of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Suddenly, everything that they had known was taken from them, and they're now slaves in a foreign world. So let me break it down to you even more. Basically, the first chapter of this book introduces this young fella named Daniel. He's super smart, and he ends up becoming an advisor to some very important pagan leaders. Daniel and his buds, they become part of this crazy famous tale of bravery and faith as they were sent to Babylon for re-education by the pagans. And boy, did they go through a lot. They had to learn all about Babylonian religion, culture, language, literature. But to rub it all in, the guy in charge of training them gave them new names. Daniel became Belteshazzar. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are now his 3 buddies. All part and parcel of trying to change their identity completely and force them to give up their Jewish heritage. Now, most of the other captive kids, they probably just went along. But not these 4. No way, Jose. They were bound and determined to stay true to their faith, even though they knew they would always be captives. They would probably never see their families again. Yet they still wanted to obey God and to follow his laws, even when it came to what they ate. So Daniel had enough guts to ask the chief eunuch, who was the guy in charge of their training, if they could skip the fancy food served at the king's table. The king's food was top-notch, but it included stuff that was considered unclean, according to the law of Moses. The chief eunuch, he was too keen on letting them break the rules, even though he respected Daniel. But our boy had a plan. He suggested a test. He and his Hebrew buddies would eat just veggies and drink water for 10 days. And guess what? They totally rocked it. They proved that they could thrive on this vegetarian diet. And here's where things get even more interesting. God was so impressed with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that he blessed them with crazy wisdom and smarts. And Daniel was also blessed with this incredible ability to understand dreams. Superpowers, you know? Well, those God-given powers made all 4 of them super important. Superpowers, super important. But it also put them in some tough situations where they had to choose between staying faithful to their beliefs or to looking out for themselves. Now let's take a sec and talk about Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. He's got this dream that's really bothering him. And instead of just asking his occultists to interpret it, well, he decides to put them to the test. He wants them to not only tell him the meaning of the dream, but also what the dream itself was actually about. He's basically saying, if you're truly spiritual, insightful, then you should be able to know what I dreamed. But these occultists, well, they tried to buy time, but eventually they straight up said it was impossible and unreasonable. So Nebuchadnezzar orders them all to be executed. Yikes! But here comes our superhero Daniel. He finds out about this situation, and he goes straight to the king. Now, he doesn't know the meaning of the dream yet, but he's confident that God will provide the answer. So he asks his fellow Hebrew captives to pray for him. And what happens? Well, God responds by giving Daniel vision, revealing both the dream and its meaning. Now, Daniel's grateful to God, and he praises his amazing wisdom and his authority. When Daniel meets with the king, he tells him that no human being could possibly know what the king dreamt. But Daniel tells him also that he knows a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He gives all the credit to the Lord, who chose to reveal the dream's meaning to Daniel because it predicts the future. So what's the deal with his dream? You see, the king dreams of this huge, terrifying statue. It had a head made of gold, a silver chest and arms, a bronze midsection and iron legs, and feet made of a mixture of iron and clay. And then the supernatural stone comes along, smashes the statue's feet. Well, and the whole thing crumbles to dust. But the stone, well, it keeps growing until it covers the entire world. Now, Daniel explains that these different materials in the statue, well, they represent future kingdoms. And guess what? History actually proves him right. The golden head symbolizes Nebuchadnezzar himself as king of Babylon. The silver chest and arms, well, they represent the Medo-Persian Empire. The bronze midsection, well, that predicts the Greek Empire. And the iron legs, well, that depicts the Roman Empire. Now, that's some pretty accurate predictions right there. I don't care who you are. But here's the kicker. That stone that smashes the statue, well, it represents a kingdom formed by God that will conquer the world and never be defeated. Now, in response to all this, well, old Nebuchadnezzar, he's pretty amazed, and he honors David. He sees him as someone who's connected to divine power. However, he still considers Daniel's God as just one among many, since he's still holding on to his pagan beliefs. But hey, he promotes Daniel to a high position of authority and leadership. And he even gives his three buddies important roles in the government. Now, speaking of those three friends, well, you stay tuned, because these guys are in for a horrifying test of their own, where the king commands them to worship an idol or be thrown into a fiery furnace. A fire so hot that even the guards standing by die from the heat. But hey, that's for next week. So now we know what Daniel chapter 1 and 2 have to say. But what does it all really mean? Well, I'm saying that God gets pretty fed up with the people of Judah because they just can't seem to listen to what he has to say and follow his rules. So what does God do? He puts old Nebuchadnezzar, the conqueror, into Judah. And to make matters worse, Nebuchadnezzar takes all the items from God's house and he stashes them into his own God's house. The Jewish people are basically forced to worship Nebuchadnezzar's God. That Nebuchadnezzar's goal is to absorb Judah and to make them into Babylonians. As Daniel and his buddies forced to follow Babylonian teachings, traditions, and diets. And then moving into part 2, we get some comfort in the fact that God knows the future. Daniel shows us how God's wisdom and power and his sovereignty can change our perspective on the people and the situations in our own lives. We might not have a clue what lies ahead or what's going on, but that God loves us and that he knows all. And because of that, we can totally trust in him. And that wraps up today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed diving into the book of Daniel with me. Stay tuned for more exciting content coming your way. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe